Welcome to the next episode of the Learnit Podcast. I am very delighted and excited to have Myke joining us today. Myke, thank you so much for spending some time out of your day and being here on a Friday evening, I must say.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're really excited to have you as a guest because you come with a wealth of unique experience teaching both at the university level and then at the high school level and now assistant head of school. So we're really excited to get the different types of perspectives that you can bring to this podcast and help our listeners learn a little bit more about what those subtle differences are that people might not see in their everyday lives. So I'm going to start off, Myke, by sort of helping the audience and both myself learn a little bit more about your childhood. So can you take us back to your childhood? How were you like as a child? What would your parents and teachers have said about you? Because I'm curious to see if that has any connection to what you do today.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. So I grew up in Toronto. I grew up going to independent schools. I started at Havergal College, which is actually an all-girls school to this day. And my mom was an old girl, so I was able to go as a little boy. Little boys, just for a few years. They don't do that anymore. And then I went on to Upper Canada College, which is an all-boys school in Toronto, and was there for 13 years. They called them a survivor back in the day when you go from grade 3 to 13. I graduated high school in 1994, and of course, back then they still had grade 13, the only jurisdiction in North America to have grade 13. Of course, Ontario no longer has grade 13, but some lament the loss of that time. Because as a boy, I was curious and excitable and loved camp and doing stuff outside and friends, like, a very happy, joyous childhood. That's my key takeaway, and I think, to those early years.
Wow. And how did you find your love for education? Like, how is that something you ended up doing?
So when I was in high school, I started teaching, instructing, like swimming, and then lifeguarding and life-saving, like bronze medallion and bronze cross. And I instructed first aid and CPR. And I did it because I was in the camp world, and it's really helpful to have qualifications when you work at camp as a teenager. But because I love learning, I would do these courses and then want to do more of them. So I was probably one of the most qualified, sort of 17-year-olds in the province at the time, because I could instruct first aid and CPR and NLS and everything in that field. And I always loved instructing and teaching, and so it was natural when I graduated that I should look at going into education. And so I applied and went to Queen's for the concurrent education program, which is a 5-year double degree program where you earn a bachelor's and then your Bachelor of Education degree.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it really started from swimming instructions. And, I find it similar. I've spoke to so many people, and there always seems to be something that they teach, whether it's swimming, whether it's sometimes it's art and craft. I used to teach, I used to help my friends with their homework because they needed help always. And that's when I first started teaching, and I was like, this is fun, right? So it's always really cool to see how a lot of people in education actually maybe don't realize it, but they start at a young age in very subtle ways in that space as well. And today you've been at Trinity College for a long time as well. You've sort of grown within the school as well. I'm curious to know what first drew you to TCS and what has kept you there for so long.
Yeah, great. So when I graduated as a young teacher and educator, I never actually thought of going into the classroom. It was not my aspiration nor desire. And my first job in education was working for Canada World Youth, which was an amazing organization that unfortunately no longer exists, but it was funded for years by DFATE and then different branches of the Canadian federal government. And basically for 4 years, I had worked overseas directing international youth programs. And so the program would work, you'd have a group of Canadians, and for 3.5 months, you would be in a small community somewhere in Canada. And then you would go overseas and do the same thing with a small community overseas. And so I would have, for example, like the first year, I had a group of students from Thailand who lived with a group of Canadians in the little town of Durham, south of Owen Sound. And we lived all together in Durham in host families. They did volunteer work. And the whole team then went over to Thailand and did the same thing. So it's like a cross-cultural exchange. And I did the same in India, and then in Mongolia, and then in Sri Lanka. And so as a young educator, I mean, it was the best job in the world. Because you're traveling, you're working with youth, it's an experiential education setting, you're seeing such profound change in these young people. It was like the best job, just best like teaching education experience I think possible. And so I was actually signed up to do another contract in Africa with Canada World Youth. And my wife at the time, we were building a house, and then got pregnant, and then couldn't go and spend 6 months a year overseas. And so I was literally scrunching up a copy of the Globe and Mail one day to make a fire in this house that we had just built. And I saw an ad for Trinity College School. And because I had a young child on the way and a new home to pay for, and I was like really stressed about not being employed, I applied and thankfully was given the job at TCS as a social science teacher. And even though it was an hour away, I decided, well, I got to do something because we had this baby, and started working at TCS. And that was 20 years ago. And then I became the department head, then I became the director of teaching and learning. Now my current role as assistant head of senior school of teaching and learning. So in my role, I help to oversee faculty and curriculum. I do work a lot with committees on hiring. I look at the online learning program. I oversee our ministry inspections. I do a lot around professional development and helping teachers grow in their craft. And so that's and I continue to be here because it's like a privilege to work at such a great independent school with so many opportunities and so many great colleagues. I mean, it's really like when you get in a place like this, it's lovely to come to work every day, frankly.
Yeah, I guess it's good that you needed that fire that night in some ways. Yeah, it worked out for 20 years. That fire is still burning, you know? That's awesome. That's wonderful. It's such a unique story. And I think it's a testament to how sometimes in life, we'll come across things that will change our life or, in small ways, and we don't know when those things enter our life. So it's super interesting. And I want to unwrap a little bit more about when you started to talk about your current role today, helping teachers with professional development, helping oversee the ministry and sort of the involvement with the ministry. And can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? Especially, I'm more interested also from the teacher development and professional development part. Are there specific areas that you sense are the most exciting areas of development today for the teachers when you look at the next 5 years? What's the biggest skill that you think they're focusing on or they should focus on when they're growing their professional careers?
Yeah, compelling point. So I spent a lot of time thinking about professional development and what that looks like for teachers. And my research and thought and writing about it over the years and overseeing that program really has brought me to a few key conclusions. The first is that a faculty in a school, if you have a faculty that is engaged in professional learning and professional growth, is a better place for kids. There's like no doubt about that. The research bears it out. John Hattie's work in particular shows that a strong culture of professional development. Teachers are always growing. They're willing to take risks and try new things and bring new ideas into the classroom. And it's really engaging for students. And teachers who are willing to engage in professional development, that means that they're also engaged in their craft and wanting to learn. And teachers who are continually learning are better teachers in the classroom because there's a sense of vibrancy and being up to date with things that are happening. I've also realized that really professional development needs to be an age and stage graduates for a program. Is that somebody who's an early career teacher needs different kind of support than somebody who's in mid-career and somebody who's in a later career. And so we've really taken an approach where for an early career teacher, we give them a lot of in-house support, help them do additional qualification courses because we're in Ontario. And it's really about that sort of day-to-day support and helping them grow. And then mid-career teachers, I mean, if you've been teaching for 15, 20 years, you've taught for close to 10,000 hours. So you reach that mastery stage. And I know that 10,000 hours as a number seems somewhat arbitrary and all Malcolm Gladwell-y, but essentially that's sort of, you get to that stage in your career where you're really comfortable with teaching, you know who you are, you know what kind of educator you are. You're a master at that craft, and that cannot be taught. That is earned through years and years and years of experience. And the fine colleagues in the building who are at that age, and I'm at that age too, is keeping folks like us engaged, is allowing to go to conferences and to learn new ideas from experts, or perhaps supporting people to do an advanced graduate degree. We have 6 faculty members who the school is supporting through the process of getting their master's degree.
Wow.
Because we know that when you are engaged in your own work, you learn things, but also you learn what it's like to write an essay again. Because often you don't write an essay after you leave university. And it's really important to understand like how to write and reference and cite if you then teach those skills to kids in your class. And then late career, it's about how do we engage folks who are in the later part of their career to be mentors and to share their knowledge with those coming behind them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very compelling, and especially the fact that there's that investment in the teachers to continue to learn and grow their own self, because that, I think, is also what keeps a lot of educators excited to do their job, because they also have that passion to continue to learn from a lot of people. And it's interesting to see it sort of come to life. And, from the research that I've done, Myke, it seems like TCS also has a relatively, I don't know if rigorous is the right word, but a relatively tougher academic program as well. Like the performance is higher. There's a bit more, I think, from what I was seeing, a bit more of an emphasis put on that as well. And I'm curious to know, are there any innovative practices or strategies that you and the team have implemented that have enhanced student success or student learning outcomes? Because I think I am a big fan of sort of co-creation. And if there's something that works at a school for the kids, then we should try and scale it across different schools. So I'm curious to know if there's any programs or initiatives that you've found being an incredible success at TCS.
A couple of things pop to mind right away. One, I mean, we are very fortunate as an independent school that students and families who choose to come to TCS recognize that we are very much an academic school, that we are very much a university preparatory school in terms of we send like 100% of our students go on to post-secondary. And so there is very much a culture of achievement and moving on after secondary school to post-secondary. There are kids, many kids who are very keen and motivated and really want to, go to some top flight schools. Right now, grade 12s are writing their personal statements in order to apply to a lot of US schools, for example. So there's a culture. I would say that it is cool to be smart here. Mm-hmm. And that is a culture that is not easy to build, but once in place is incredibly powerful as a motivator for students. Not that it's super stressful and that we're on kids all the time if they're, like achieve, because that creates a different kind of stress. And a lot of kids are already putting that on themselves, or maybe they have parental stress. But I think internally, there's celebration of kids who do well academically, even in terms of awards, even like privileges that they may get. And so there's that sense that it is better to be smart and do your work than not.
Yeah.
I'm on duty tonight in the library, and it's Friday evening. And for students who are missing academic work, they are invited to come to the library tonight at 7:00 in order to do their missing work. At TCS, I say to the kids, we submit our work on time and we do it with integrity. That is the kind of place that we are. And that culture is one that's been long nurtured, and it's not mine. I mean, I've been part of this place for a long time, but that is really a collective effort in terms of nurturing that sort of environment. We also do have an enriched program. We have to teach the Ontario curriculum because we grant the OSSD, but we enrich that by offering the advanced placement program. And we have a long history, over 25 years, of offering advanced placement courses in a very well-established AP program. And for teachers who teach in the advanced placement level, it requires them to do a summer institute. So they're done additional training because they love their discipline that they teach, and they're willing to then go do additional training and then teach these enriched courses for students because they like teaching, they like the discipline, and they like being able to provide that enriched sort of course material to our kids.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I love the sort of catch up on your work in the library. You're gracefully invited and highly encouraged to show up as well. So that's really incredible to see the investment in both the educators and the students to drive success for the school. And the other piece, Myke, that was very interesting about your background to me personally was the fact that you've also taught at the university level or spent some time at Queen's University. And, from my interactions, because I spent my first 4 years more with teachers and professors at the university level, and now more so with high schools. And I tend to see a bit of a delta. And when I talk to university professors, they seem to feel that the gap is widening between the type of students we used to get 5-10 years ago that used to come out into university and the type of students that maybe are coming into university these days. I'm just curious to get your opinion as to, do you think that gap is widening, whether it's from an academic competency or a human skill element? Do you think that there's an opportunity there for schools to improve or sort of narrow that gap a little bit as to prepare the kids for university?
Like full disclosure, I don't teach like a first year university course to have a real sense of like a grade 12 in a first year, but I do instruct additional qualification courses for Queens, which are usually often early career teachers who are doing that. But I think what I do see, because I do a lot of hiring of brand new teachers, and so people who are just leaving a B.Ed program, because we have a program where essentially first year teachers are able to come and live on site. They teach a class of their own, and they do in-house supply teaching. So I have seen, as I work with very young educators, that there has been a change over time. And I think there's often, generational changes, and I'm wary about sort of wading into the generational debate, this generation versus that generation. But what I do, I've been fairly connected to the post-secondary world through my doctoral work and speaking with professors who work with first-year students and working with young teachers, and then working with grade 12 students who are leaving our care and going to university. There is a very interesting dynamic that I see happening in Canada, and it's this sense of, as secondary school educators, we are like, well, we're preparing them for university, but often teachers are thinking about preparing students for the university that they went to, as in when they were a university student, which might be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so often, secondary school teachers don't actually have direct experience that is recent in post-secondary. So we talk about preparing kids for university, but they don't necessarily really know exactly what university is like anymore. On the flip side, we have universities being like, well, why are these kids coming to us and they don't have these basic skills? We expect them to be able to do this and they can't, or they can't write anymore, they're not reading. It's like, also, you got to realize that when you work with teenagers and young people in K to 12, you also understand that kids are just different these days. And so, of course, bringing different skills and different ways of being when they get to university. So it's like these two sort of sides are both looking at each other. We are preparing them. Like, you're not preparing them enough. And like, I don't understand the kids. Like, these dynamics are all going on and everybody's right. And at the same time, I think what we need is more people bridging the K to 12 post-secondary. And I'm finding in my work currently, is having a foot in both of those spaces is very interesting to see these basically two totally separate worlds, like post-secondary and K to 12. And we think that that's really permeable membrane, but really when people get into their careers and they're working in post-secondary, like that's what they do. And K to 12 folks, like they're in K to 12. And there needs to be more opportunities for real collaboration, I think, between high schools and universities.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And I think it's, to your point, everybody's right in their own world, right? So it's not that people are sort of, saying things intentionally, but it's so interesting to see how the dynamic should shift. And I love your point of, you need to have your foot in both the doors, because otherwise you're going to prepare kids for a university that's completely different. And the university is expecting kids and they're going to get something else, right? So those two worlds need to find that Venn diagram intersection or have people that at least are involved in both worlds, sort of participating. That's interesting. And, one of the incredible achievements, Myke, that I read about you was that you're one of only 2 Canadians to have read the AP seminar and, of course, exam in its inaugural year. I'm curious to know how that involvement with the AP Capstone project or program has really influenced your approach to whether it's assessment or student evaluations.
Yeah, it's great. I strongly encourage any teacher who teaches advanced placement to hopefully be a reader. And so as a reader, you're one of those people that goes and then marks AP research exams. Now, a couple of things. One, unfortunately, my understanding is that ETS, which is the company that the College Board outsources to mark all the AP exams. That's recently changed to another provider, and they have said flat out that they will not seek H-1B visas for any non-Americans to grade advanced placement tests. So I think unless that changes, I think the window for international readers, as in non-Americans, to grade AP papers and exams, I think is diminishing, which is unfortunate because the experience, recognized not for everybody, but in that inaugural year, what I did is I traveled to Salt Lake City in Utah, and I sat in a windowless conference room for 10 days and staring at a screen, and like a piece of student work would come up and you would grade it, and then another piece would come up and you'd grade it, and you did that all day, every day for 10 days. I mean, that is like grinding modern day piecework.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is when you get really fast at grading that particular question, because you know exactly what to look for. And so ever since then, whenever I was teaching that skill in AP Seminar, I was like amazing at teaching that skill because I knew exactly what readers were looking for that particular question. And those skills were generally transferable to other questions on the exam, but not like entirely. You just get really good at what you were marking. And two, I would suggest that it's when you mark and grade like that, you have an appreciation for that kids might really be working hard at something, but the amount of time that the assessor is looking at their work is like not commensurate with the effort that went into it because it's so fast. And I think, you know, we like to think that the work we put out in the world, somebody's reading it really carefully with the care and intention that we wrote it. But in light of, you know, the speed that's required, I don't necessarily think that actually happens.
Yeah.
I think the International Baccalaureate program, they also do very similar things. And I have not been involved in IB, but I appreciate that they are in a similar situation in terms of all of these people around the world grading IB exams. It'd be really interesting to talk to.
I remember, Myke, I did my high school in Uganda, and I did my IB, International Baccalaureate. And my teacher in Uganda was a grader for the IB business program. And I found it so cool to see the amount of diversity. So he was grading kids that were putting their papers in from Japan, from, you know, all around the world. And it's just the sphere of the graders that are all across the world. I mean, it was a tough program as a you know, at that age, but it was definitely something that was really interesting to see. And I think I have, you know, I love your point of how much effort that's put in as a grader is really a fraction of the effort put in by the student to bring it to that point. And it reminded me of the analogy, you know, if you look at jobs today, you know, on average, people spend 7 seconds on your resume, right? But you spend so much time building up those experiences and putting that together. But a recruiter has 1,000 on their desk. So they look at it for 7 seconds and they make a decision. So it's definitely an interesting analogy that also extends to the real world.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And, you know, sort of one of the things I was curious to get your perspective on, Myke, was I've noticed, you know, of course, I think everybody has, but today's age and today's generation, they have a lot of strengths. But one of the challenges they face is just the influence of technology and social media in general. I think it's getting more and more prominent from what I've seen and heard. I'm curious to know from your perspective and from TCS's perspective, how do you strike that balance between you still want the kids to innovate and be comfortable with technology and grow because that's such a big area of the real world, but also you want them to have some of the traditional, you know, actual raw learning experiences, you know, that they need to learn at their age as well. So how do you see that balance being struck?
Well, like really schools across North America, there's the phone piece that I think is intricately linked with this, and that, like other schools, we've taken an approach where we are actively discouraging the use of phones in the hallway, not having them out in class or in the dining hall or in, you know, morning assembly, like being really much more strict in terms of wanting a place where kids are walking with their eyes up and making eye contact and not just staring at their phone or having their AirPods in all the time. So we've had some good inroads with that. I think that's helpful. You know, when I looked at the data for our school in terms of the amount of data coming into the school, in a 2-week span, we had something like 750 gigabytes of incoming TikTok data And TikTok alone dwarfed every other audiovisual application significantly, like over 55% of incoming data to the school was from that single source. And it is remarkable to think of an application that has had and is having such an impact, and I would argue a profound impact, although it's going to take legions of scholars, years and years to really figure it out. But watching my own children scrolling continuously on TikTok, it just sees how it captures the attention. And so, trying to get kids off the phone so they can make eye contact and be here and now and present is important. I'd say one thing a silver lining of the pandemic is this. Before the pandemic, I work a lot in online education. There was a feeling that we could do so many things with online education. That it would be like online was amazing and that we could solve all these problems. And Ontario even committed to every student should do 2 online courses in order to graduate in Ontario. We were looking at expanding our online offerings, like really this push, thinking that like the future of education involved online learning. And then the pandemic taught us, no, God, we need in-person learning. It was so clear that desire, what is lost when we're not humans in a room speaking and learning together, is so profound. And I think if that hadn't happened, we would be going down this road, online, and we wouldn't have had the shock to the system to make us realize, oh, wait a second, like learning is highly relational. And when people are in a room, that thing happens that just can't be done in an online environment, even with synchronous online learning. So the last thing, and maybe it will come up in a future question, but we should also, of course, talk about generative AI and what that is going to do to education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the analogy that you're sort of presenting as well, which is, we would have been down this rabbit hole trying to innovate online. And sort of, now that we've seen the 2 worlds, I think educators have seen how there's so many intangible pieces to being in the same room. You might not be able to put it to paper, whether it's the eye contact, whether it's the smiles, whether it's the saying hello in the hallways. Those add up so significantly that we do not realize that. And we thought, yeah, online is more accessible and it's more easier. And then you got your cameras off and you don't even know who is there and what they're doing. And now you see, okay, you know what? Let's just stick around in person, because I personally think that for education, especially for that age group, for teenagers, it is incredibly important to be physically present in the same schools.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's a good transition to my next question and to your point as well, which is, what are some of the futures of education, whether it's from a technology or innovation perspective, that you think is the biggest hitters in the next 5 years? You said Gen AI. I think a lot of people are just thinking about artificial intelligence. They're trying different things, which is exciting to see in some ways. How are you thinking of it as TCS and as an individual yourself?
So I'm thinking about it a lot. It is a subject of my doctoral research. I'm looking at the nexus of generative AI and academic integrity in a K-12 setting. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about what does our conceptions of plagiarism and academic integrity look like in a school environment where the majority of written work is actually a human-AI collaboration. And that we have long had this feeling that, students' written work should be entirely their own. And if it's not, it should be cited and attributed to the place where they got the information, whether it's from the internet or what have you. And now we're in this sphere where generative AI is an incredibly powerful and helpful tool. I use it as a co-pilot all the time in my writing to improve my own written work. But in doing so, we have to reconceptualize what we think plagiarism is. And I am inspired by the work of my supervisor, Sarah Elaine Eaton at the University of Calgary, who coined the term post-plagiarism, and really challenging academics and scholars and educators to consider how we can, what we think about this word plagiarism, what a post-plagiarism academic environment looks like. I find that very compelling because I want to maintain academic integrity. I want students to think for themselves, but I also recognize that this tool is very helpful, incredibly powerful, is not going anywhere. And we need to teach students how to use it thoughtfully and ethically in order to improve their work and yet not replace their own thinking.
Yeah. It's such a good balance though, because I think as kids, it's it's very difficult to be mature enough to stop using it in a way that's going to benefit you. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like telling me, like, let's say you want me to multiply 10 times 15 on a calculator, and I have the choice to type in 10 times 15, but I have to type in 10 times 10 and then do the other half myself. So in some ways, don't you think it's really difficult to sort of find that balance, especially from a kid's perspective, who have this tool at the power of their fingertips that can really just like do anything for them? You think it's the teacher's responsibility, the school's responsibility, the parents?
It's a collective, but I would think it's going to take. So let me put it like this. I like to think of this time that we're in as AI arbitrage, that we are in a moment in time, this liminal space between the introduction of generative AI tools and at some point in the future, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, a reconceptualization of what teaching and pedagogy looks like when these tools are used by everybody all the time. So we are not there yet, and we're not going to be there for some time, because that's a real, almost a cultural shift of thinking, what is education, what is writing, what are essays, what is assessment in a land where you can use a generative AI tool to help you co-create your work. So this arbitrage is a period of time where students are using it. Of course they are. I do. It's a great tool.
Yeah.
And teachers and educators and scholars and parents catching up with what is okay and what is not okay. In the meantime, there's just widespread use. And there's, from our current conception, like massive amount of academic dishonesty happening, for sure. Because people can, you can easily use a Gen AI tool now to write most, any assignment that you're going to be given at the high school level. And so we got to catch up and reconsider and reconceptualize what we're going to do about it. And I don't have the answers of what that's going to look like, but I'm really aware of this time of arbitrage where it's happening before we figure it out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, and I think it's a good place. It's not the worst place to be. At least we've built the awareness, and there's that collective interest in trying to find a unique way to still teach, but also not disregard the technology that's going to shape our future so significantly. So definitely something there. All right, Myke. Well, we're going to shift gears into our rapid fire round. So this is my best part, because it allows me to learn a little bit more about you on a personal level. So I'll hit you with a question. You could respond in under a minute. The first one is, what is one thing you've recently changed your mind about?
If I look at that relatively recent as the past 2 years, I think that my thoughts about how we can use technology to co-create our own work has radically changed.
Interesting. Okay, how we can co-create our work. Okay, awesome. What is one part of your daily routine that you cannot skip?
Like a really good coffee in the morning is absolutely essential. I like working out and exercising. I find that like super helpful, at least, 4 or 5 times a week if I can. That's really nice. Like texting and talking with friends and family, super important. So I think, there's lots of stuff I like about my work, but I think the human side of life is also really, really important.
Yeah, nothing beats a good coffee in the morning. Nothing good. Well, when you were in school, what was your most favorite and least favorite subject?
So my most favorite as a high school student was certainly geography. And my least favorite, I really struggled in math and languages. And probably had my brains wired. And I don't believe, I don't fall prey to the thing like somebody's not good at math. I know that that's a trope. And I believe that with proper support that people can learn those skills. I didn't have that support at the time, and so struggled. But I love the social sciences. So really anything to do with learning about modern history, society as we know it, understanding why things are the way they are, that I find so compelling.
Very interesting. That's why you're in social sciences. I guess I got my answer there. If you could visit any country or place in the world today, where would you go and why?
So I have a deep affinity for India. I've been there several times, both leading a program with Canada World Youth, and 2 years I took groups from Trinity College School to do some volunteer work and to travel. And I love Indian culture and Indian food. I love the North and the South and the mountains. And even though I've been there a bunch, I would always go back.
Okay, I love India too, so I am biased. All right, wonderful. And the last question on the rapid fire round, what is something that not many people know about you?
I think maybe in a professional context, people maybe don't know that I'm actually like super sort of like soft and kind and compassionate by nature, which I try to bring out in my work. But also, you got to, especially as an administrator, like you need to. We all have our boundaries, but really, my preference or my inclination is towards gentleness more than anything.
Interesting. So firm on the outside, soft-hearted on the inside for you, Myke. You're strict for the students, but you're really kind if they get to know you.
Yeah, I try to be very kind to students right off the gate because we know that what students need more than anything is educators who listen, who care about them, and creating that dynamic in the classroom is like the most important thing for me when I'm actually educating myself in the classroom and being really supportive of kids.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, to be honest with you. Couldn't agree more. And the final question to end us off over here, Myke, what is one parting thought that you would leave with our listeners today? So it could be a lesson that you have learned that has stuck with you for a long time. It could be something for the future generation, but what is something you'd like to leave with our listeners today to think about?
If for educators who are actively in the field right now, if you're at all nervous or unsure about generative AI, then my advice is just to start using it yourself. Is that this technology is here to stay. It will profoundly impact education as we currently know it. And educators need to be aware and understand what it can do. And the only way to do that is to get in and use it yourself. The next time you need to look something up on the internet because you want to learn about something, instead of going to Google, go to Perplexity and use an AI tool to use it to find information. Next time you need to write a letter or a paper or something, using GPT-4o or Claude or Gemini, and see the ability of these tools to co-pilot so that you understand what kids can be doing themselves with these tools.
I love that. Such an important thing for everybody to do. And it's like when you use it, you really see the power behind it and you start to understand it more better. So that's a great note to end us off on, Myke. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode filled with a lot of really great insights, good advice, and we got to know Myke a little bit more personally today. So thank you, Myke, for being here today, and we look forward to the next one.
Thank you.